While I was at my sickest, I gave my daughter my bank cards to pay my bills. She repaid my trust by draining my life savings and leaving me homeless. Doctors worked hard to heal my body, but nothing could have prepared me for the wound my own child would inflict while I was too weak to fight back.
The key wouldn't turn. My key, for my house of 40 years, no longer fit in the lock. The brass felt colder than the damp autumn air. Alien in my own palm, I jiggled it, just as I had 1,000 times before, expecting that familiar, comforting clink of the tumblers giving way. But there was only a hard, metallic stop, a dead sound. A full stop, and through the rippled privacy glass of my own front door, I could see a shape, a silhouette. It was my daughter Chloe, standing in the foyer of my home, her home, the one she grew up in, and she was looking right at me. Not with anger, not with sadness, with nothing. The detached, placid gaze of a stranger observing something irrelevant through a window. In that moment, the chill had nothing to do with the weather. It was the icy realization that the person on the other side of that door was not the person I thought I knew, and I was no longer home. That was the moment the ground gave way, the moment the story ended. But to understand it, to really understand the depth of it, you have to go back to where it all began. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Granny's Couch. My name is Eleanor, and I am so glad you're here with me today. I'm going to tell you the story behind that horrifying moment. A story about a mother's blind love, and the one devastating mistake that cost me everything I had ever worked for. It's a cautionary tale, yes. The kind that makes you hold your breath and check your own locks. But it is also a story about finding the strength to rebuild when your entire world has been turned to ash. It's about how you can lose every single thing you thought defined you, and still find yourself standing in the rubble. Before you can understand the rubble, you have to understand the cathedral that stood there first. You have to understand what was lost. My life before it wasn't extraordinary, not in the way the world counts things. But it was a life built of good solid timber, 45 years of it, with my husband, David. That house on Elm Street wasn't just wood and nails to us. It was a living thing. It was a witness. The walls held the echoes of our arguments and the phantom scent of 1,000 Sunday roasts. The worn spot on the third step of the staircase was from me, sitting there every morning with my first cup of tea. The faint smell of sawdust that never quite left the hallway closet came from David's workshop in the garage, his sanctuary. He was a man who thought with his hands. If something was broken, he fixed it. A leaky faucet, a wobbly chair, my own frayed nerves. After a long day, he had a quiet, steady competence that was the foundation of my world. His laughter was a low rumble that you felt in your chest. The house was full of his sounds, the sharp snip of the shears in his rose garden, the murmur of the baseball game on the radio, the heavy thud of his work boots by the back door. When you've lived with a sound for 45 years, you don't even notice it's there until it's gone. And when he passed, the silence he left behind wasn't empty, it was loud. It was a physical presence that pressed in on me from all sides. The dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunbeams felt impossibly sad. I'd walk from room to room, a ghost in my own life, tracing the outline of the dent his head had made on his favorite armchair pillow. I found myself lost in the simple mechanics of living. The mail would pile up on the console table, a stack of white-winded envelopes full of language I no longer understood. Premiums, deductibles, municipal taxes. David had always handled that. He had a mind for numbers and a patience for fine print that I never did. My world was the garden, the kitchen, the feel of a story well told to my daughter when she was a little girl. His world was the sturdy, invisible architecture that held ours up. Without him, I was living in a house with no frame. And then, into that deafening silence, walked Chloe. She came in like a whirlwind of competence, her arms full of groceries, her voice full of purpose. She took one look at the pile of mail, at my tired face, and she just took over. It started small. She sat with me at the kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She had her father's serious expression when she concentrated, and she sorted the mail into neat piles. "This is junk, Mum. This is important. We'll handle this one first." That word was a lifeline. Suddenly, I wasn't alone in the quiet house. Chloe was there. She filled the kitchen with the smell of coffee and the sound of her decisive, energetic chatter. She answered the phone. She made the appointments. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt myself take a full, deep breath. The weight on my chest, the one I didn't even realize I'd been carrying, began to lift. She was my daughter.
Of course she was.
But in those first few months, she also became my rock, my confidant, my David. It felt like she had inherited his competence, his ability to make the world make sense. I'd watch her on the phone with the insurance company, her voice firm and clear, and a wave of pure, undiluted pride would wash over me. That's my girl. So strong, so capable. The conversations about the finances happened slowly, organically. They were kitchen table talks, held over mugs of steaming tea. It began with a simple problem, a password I couldn't remember for an online account. Chloe sighed, not with annoyance, but with a kind of gentle sympathy. "Mum, you shouldn't have to struggle with this stuff," she said, her hand covering mine on the oak table. "You've got enough on your plate just grieving. Why don't you let me handle the online side of things? I can set everything to auto-pay. You'll never have to think about another due date again." It sounded like the most sensible thing in the world. It sounded like relief, so I gave her the password. A few weeks later, it was an issue with the bank itself. A hold on a check, something confusing that required a trip downtown. Chloe came back that afternoon, looking frustrated. "They were a nightmare, Mum. They almost wouldn't talk to me because my name isn't on your main account. It took an hour just to prove I had your permission. It would be so much easier, just for emergencies, if we added me as a co-signer, just so I can handle things for you without all the red tape." I remember hesitating, just for a second, a tiny fluttering tremor of something. I thought of David. He was a private man. "Keep your business your own, Eleanor," he'd always say. But then I looked at Chloe's face, etched with genuine concern for my well-being, and I felt a pang of guilt for that flicker of doubt. This wasn't some stranger. This was my child, my only child, trying to protect me. Resisting her felt like a betrayal. It felt like I was telling her I didn't trust her. So we went to the bank together the next day. I remember the teller being a very kind young woman. I remember signing the forms, my signature, feeling a little shaky next to Chloe's bold, confident script. And when it was done, Chloe squeezed my hand and said, "There, now you can relax. I've got you." And I did. I relaxed completely. The change was profound. My life became simple again. The piles of mail vanished. The confusing phone calls stopped. All the sharp, difficult edges of a world without David were suddenly smoothed over. Chloe would visit 3-4 times a week. Sometimes she'd bring her laptop and sit at the kitchen table, paying bills while I told her about my garden. "The roses are finally coming in," and she'd nod, her eyes on the screen, and say, "That's great, Mum," before asking, "What's the security code on the back of your debit card again?" I'd tell her. I wouldn't even think twice. Why would I? My idea of a loving family, the one I had built my entire identity around, was one without walls. It was a place of open doors and open hearts, where you gave what was needed without keeping score. A place where trust wasn't something to be earned or measured, but the very air you breathe. To question my daughter's intentions would have felt like questioning the foundation of my own beliefs. It would have been cynical, and I was not a cynical woman. I had given my daughter the keys to my life. Not as a transaction, not as a business decision, but as an act of love, a testament. In the quiet of my big, empty house, I felt a deep and abiding peace. I felt protected. I felt safe. I truly believed, with every fiber of my being, that it was the smartest, most sensible thing I had ever done. That feeling of safety, that deep and abiding peace, it lasted for 2 years. 2 beautiful, simple, uncomplicated years. The quiet in the house was no longer loud with grief. It was just peaceful. I had my garden, my books, my regular phone calls with my friend Margaret, who always seemed to be gently probing, asking if I was really okay, if Chloe was really managing everything, and I would always laugh and tell her to stop worrying. "She's a marvel, Margaret," I'd say. "She has her father's head for numbers. I don't have to think about a single thing." And I didn't. I floated through my days in a bubble of serene ignorance, a bubble I had mistaken for security. And then, one Tuesday afternoon in late September, the mail came. It was a perfect autumn day. The air was crisp and the leaves on the big maple in the front yard were just beginning to turn, their edges tinged with a fiery gold. I remember I had been out back, pruning David's prize roses, feeling the satisfying scrape of the thorns against my leather gloves. My hands ached in that pleasant way they always did after a good morning's work. I came inside to put the kettle on and saw the small pile of letters on the welcome mat. Bills, a catalog, a postcard from a friend, and one more. It was an envelope made of that thin, cheap paper that feels rough to the touch. And it was red, a startling, aggressive shade of red, like a warning siren. Across a clear plastic window, in a stark, black, unforgiving font, were the words "Final Notice." My first thought was not alarm, it was annoyance, a clerical error, a piece of junk mail designed to look official and scare you. I picked it up, intending to toss it straight into the recycling bin. Honestly, the nerve of some companies. But it was addressed to me, to my house, and the name of the sender was the County Electric and Power Utility. I stood there in the entryway, the kettle beginning its low rumble from the kitchen, and I felt a small, bemused smile touch my lips. How silly. Chloe was so meticulous, but even she could make a mistake. She must have forgotten to update the mailing address on this one account when she'd switched everything over to her own management. It was probably a notice for the new residents of our old address, somehow forwarded to me. I took it to the kitchen, laid it on the cool granite countertop, and decided I should probably call them, just to be a good citizen, just to clear up their little mix-up. I poured the boiling water over a tea bag in my favorite mug, the one David had given me with the faded picture of a robin on it, and I dialed the number. The phone felt heavy and solid in my hand. Outside the window, a real-life robin was splashing in the bird bath. It was all so normal, so wonderfully, reliably normal. After a series of clicks and a tinny version of a forgotten pop song, a voice answered. "County Power, this is Brenda. How can I help you?" She sounded bored, like this was her 1,000th call of the day. "Hello, Brenda," I began, my voice cheerful and polite. "My name is Eleanor Gable. I believe I've received a notice from you by mistake. It's a rather alarming red envelope, and I just wanted to let you know so you can correct your records." There was a pause, and the sound of typing. "Can I have the account number, ma'am?" I read it out to her from the top of the letter. More typing. I took a sip of my tea. Far too hot, I burned my tongue. I watched the robin fly away from the bird bath. "Okay, Mrs. Gable, I have your account right here," Brenda said, her voice still completely flat. "Eleanor Gable, 12 Elm Street." "Yes, that's right," I said. "But as I said, I think there's been a mix-up with the billing." "Ma'am," she cut me off, not unkindly, but with an air of finality that sent a tiny cold prickle up my spine. "I'm seeing that this account is past due. The notice was sent because we have a disconnection scheduled for this Friday." I actually laughed, a small, nervous puff of air. "Oh no, that's definitely a mistake," I said, a little more forcefully this time. "All of my accounts are on automatic payment. They have been for over 2 years. My daughter handles everything. There must be a glitch in your system." Another pause, more clicking. The sound felt loud in the quiet kitchen. "Ma'am," Brenda said again, her voice losing a sliver of its manufactured patience. "I can see the payment history. A payment was attempted on September 15th, and it was returned for insufficient funds." The words just hung there in the air between us. Insufficient funds. It was a phrase from another world, a world of struggle and worry that David and I had worked our whole lives to keep at bay. It was a phrase that simply did not apply to me. "That's impossible," I stammered, my hand tightening on the phone. "There must be some kind of bank error. My pension goes in on the 1st of every month. There is always money in that account." "I can see another returned payment on August 15th, ma'am," she continued, her voice a relentless, emotionless drone of facts. "Also for insufficient funds. And another on July 15th. And June. It looks like the last successful payment we received from this account was back in March. Each date was a hammer blow. March. That was 6 months ago. The kitchen, which had felt so warm and cozy just moments before, suddenly felt cavernous and cold. My tea was forgotten. The light outside the window seemed to dim. What do you mean, insufficient funds?" My voice was a whisper. I didn't recognize it. "What is the balance?" "Ma'am, I'm not the bank. I can't give you specific account details," she said. a hint of practiced sympathy creeping into her tone now. All I can tell you is that 6 payments have been rejected, and the current balance on your power bill is $1,112, and that the account it's drawn from, it appears to be overdrawn. Overdrawn. The word didn't compute. It was like she was speaking a foreign language. The phone felt slippery in my palm. A low roaring sound started in my ears, drowning out the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Overdrawn, my savings account, the account that held David's life insurance, the account that held our 45 years of careful, diligent planning, overdrawn. Are you sure? I asked, the question sounding pathetic and weak even to my own ears. Yes, ma'am, she sighed. You'll need to speak with your bank. To avoid disconnection, we'll need the full balance paid by certified check or money order by Thursday at 5 p.m.
I don't remember what I said after that. I think I might have said, thank you.
A lifetime of politeness ingrained so deeply that it functions even when your world is actively shattering.
I remember the sharp click as she hung up,
A sound that severed the last thread of my old reality. I placed the receiver back in its cradle with a hand that was trembling so violently I could barely guide it. I stood there, motionless, in the center of my kitchen. The heart of my home, my safe place. The silence that rushed back in was the same silence that had followed David's death, but this time it was different. It was sinister. It was filled with a dread so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, stealing the air from my lungs. My gaze drifted to the window over the sink. I wasn't looking at the garden anymore. I was looking at the reflection in the dark glass. A woman stood there, her face ashen, her mouth slightly agape. Her eyes were wide with a terror so pure and absolute that it made her a stranger to me. That was the moment I realized I was looking at myself. The woman who 5 minutes ago had been safe. The woman who had been protected. The woman who had been so foolish. My mind was a maelstrom, a chaotic whirl of impossible facts and frantic questions. A bank error. It had to be a bank error, a sophisticated scam. Someone had stolen our information, hacked the account. Yes, that was it. Identity theft. I'd seen stories about it on the news. It happens to people. It's a nightmare, but it's explainable. It's survivable. Because the alternative, the other explanation that was flickering at the edges of my consciousness, a tiny monstrous spark in the overwhelming darkness that was not survivable. And in the profound ringing silence of my own kitchen, a single frantic thought began to beat against my skull like a trapped bird. I had to call Chloe. I had to warn her that something was terribly wrong. That single frantic thought, I have to call Chloe, was a desperate prayer in the ruins. My fingers, clumsy and stiff, fumbled with the buttons on the phone. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. I wasn't calling for an explanation, not yet. My mind couldn't even form that question. I was calling to warn her. I was calling as her mother, the protector. I was calling to tell my child that some terrible outside force, some faceless, predatory evil had attacked our family and that we needed to foot it together. That was the story I was telling myself, the only one I could bear. The phone rang twice, each shrill tone an eternity. Then her voice, "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" It was so normal, so breezy. Chloe, honey, something's happened, I said, my voice tight and thin. Something terrible. The power company called, they said. They said the bills haven't been paid for months. They said the account is overdrawn. I choked on the word. There was a pause on the other end. It wasn't a shocked pause. It wasn't the sound of someone's world tilting. It was a brief, thoughtful silence. A beat. "Oh," she said, and the single syllable was utterly devoid of alarm. "The power company? Ugh, they're the worst. Their system is always messing up. Don't you worry about it, Mum. It's just a glitch. I'll sort it out tomorrow. I promise." A glitch. The word was a cool hand on my feverish brow. Of course. A computer error. A glitch. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it left me weak-kneed. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my whole body sagging. "Oh, thank God," I breathed. "I was so worried. They said such awful things, honey. They made it sound so real." "I know, they're good at that," she said, a hint of laughter in her voice now. "Listen, I'm just heading into a movie. I'll call the bank first thing in the morning and get it all straightened out. You just put it out of your mind, okay? Go have a cup of tea and read your book." "Okay, honey," I said. "Okay. I love you. Love you too, Mum. Bye." The line went dead. I stood there, the dial tone a monotonous buzz in my ear. "A glitch, she'll sort it out." I repeated the words to myself like a mantra. But the relief was already starting to curdle. Her calm, it wasn't reassuring. It was, if someone told me our life savings had vanished, I would be screaming. I would be crying. I would be panicking. Chloe was just going to a movie. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the bed I had shared with David for 45 years, and for the first time it offered no comfort. The house was full of noises I'd never noticed before. The groan of the pipes, the whisper of the wind under the eaves. Every sound was a question. Every shadow was a doubt. Chloe's casual dismissal warred with Brenda from the power company's flat, certain voice. A glitch. Insufficient funds. I'll sort it out. 6 months of returned payments. The words tumbled over and over in my mind, a sickening kaleidoscope of reassurance and dread. By the time the sun rose, its weak gray light filtering through the blinds, the dread had won. I knew I couldn't wait for Chloe to sort it out. I had to go to the bank myself. The drive downtown was surreal. The world was stubbornly, cruelly normal. People were jogging, walking their dogs, heading to work with coffee cups in their hands. They were all living in a world that made sense. I felt like I was in a glass box, watching them from a great and terrifying distance. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. I parked the car and walked towards the imposing glass and marble entrance of the bank, each step feeling like I was wading through deep water. The teller was a young woman named Sarah. I remembered her because she had a kind smile and had once helped me deposit a birthday check from Margaret. She smiled at me today, too, but it faltered when she saw my face. "Mrs. Gable," she said, her voice soft. "Are you all right?" I need to see my recent statements, please," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "All of them, for the past year." Her smile was gone now, replaced by a look of deep professional pity. It was the look of someone who knows they are about to deliver devastating news. She didn't ask any questions. She just nodded, her fingers tapping quickly on her keyboard. The printer behind her whirred to life, spitting out page after page. It felt like it would never stop. She assembled them into a neat, thick stack and slid them across the counter to me. I took them to a small, private desk in the corner. For a long moment, I just stared at the top page. I was afraid to look. I knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that once I turned that first page, my life would never be the same. But I had to know. I opened the stack to the statement from 2 years ago, right after I'd given Chloe control. It was beautifully, boringly normal. Pension in, mortgage out, power, water, groceries. The balance was healthy, a comfortable cushion that David and I had built with a lifetime of careful work. Then I turned the page. And again, and again. Slowly, I moved forward in time, toward the present. At first, the changes were small. A cash withdrawal from an ATM near Chloe's apartment. $100 here, $200 there. I rationalized it. She was probably getting cash out for me for my groceries. Then came the charges from online stores I didn't recognize. Names like Net-a-Porter and Farfetch, hundreds of dollars. Then thousands. Then a recurring monthly payment to a luxury car brand. A charge from a boutique hotel in wine country. A plane ticket to Hawaii. The numbers swam before my eyes. The black ink on the white paper began to tell a story. A secret story of a life my daughter was living, a life of impossible luxury, all written down in the neat, sterile language of a bank statement. My bank statement. My money. David's money. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the sides of the desk to keep from falling. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't identity theft. The thief had a name. The thief had my last name. The thief was my daughter. The drive to Chloe's apartment is a blur. I don't remember the traffic. I don't remember the route. I just remember standing in front of her door, the thick stack of bank statements clutched in my hand like a weapon or a shield. I wasn't sure which. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. There was still a part of me, a small, foolish mother's part, that was praying for an explanation. A wild, unbelievable story about blackmail or a terrible debt. Anything but the truth that was now staring me in the face. She opened the door and her smile was bright and easy. She was wearing a silk blouse I'd never seen before, one that probably cost more than my entire monthly pension. "Mum, what a surprise. What's all that?" she said, nodding at the papers in my hand. I walked past her into the living room. It was beautiful. Sleek, modern furniture, a huge television, a vase of expensive-looking lilies on the coffee table. My money was everywhere. It was in the thread of the carpet, the gloss of the paint on the walls, the very air she was breathing. I couldn't speak. I just laid the statements out on her glass coffee table, my hands shaking so badly the papers rattled. I pointed to a charge, a withdrawal for $5,000 made 3 months ago. "Please, Chloe," I whispered, and the sound of my own voice was the sound of a heart breaking. "Please, just explain this to me." She looked down at the papers. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look ashamed. She picked up one of the pages, scanned it with a detached sort of interest, And then she looked back up at me, her face, the face I had loved since the moment she was born, the face I had kissed and cleaned and watched for 40 years, was perfectly terrifyingly calm. There was no remorse in her eyes. There was only a cold, hard clarity. "Explain what?" she asked, her voice even. "It's all there in black and white." "But this is my money," I said, the words feeling stupid and obvious. "This is my life savings, David's life insurance. It's all gone." She shrugged, a small dismissive lift of her shoulders. She walked over to her sleek modern kitchen counter and leaned against it, crossing her arms. She looked at me not like a daughter looks at her mother, but like a business rival looks at a failed competitor. And then she said the words that ended my world. "You were going to leave it to me anyway," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "I just took my inheritance a little early." The silence that followed was absolute. The city noise outside her window faded away. My own breathing stopped. I felt the words land, not in my ears, but in my chest, like shards of ice. There was no misunderstanding them. There was no explaining them away. They were the truth, a truth so monstrous, so profoundly ugly, that my mind simply could not hold it. I stumbled backwards, my hand flying to my mouth. I felt nothing. A vast, hollow emptiness where my heart used to be. The daughter I knew, the loving, competent girl who brought me groceries and sorted my mail, had never existed. She was a ghost, a performer, and the person standing in front of me was a stranger, a cold-eyed thief who happened to be wearing my daughter's face. I turned and walked out of the apartment. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. The eviction notice arrived a week later. It was tacked to my front door, a formal legal document that confirmed the nightmare. It turned out the betrayal was deeper than I could have ever imagined. Chloe hadn't just drained my accounts. She had, using her power of attorney, taken out a reverse mortgage on my home. She had taken the lump sum of cash, and then, of course, had never made a single payment. The bank was repossessing the house. My house. David's house. The last few days were a waking dream. I moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost. Every object, every photograph, every scuff on the floor was a memory now tainted with the filth of the betrayal. I had one suitcase. How do you pack a life into a single suitcase? You don't. You take fragments. I took a photograph of David and me on our wedding day. I took my mother's wedding ring. I took the small worn teddy bear that Chloe had slept with every night until she was 10. I held it in my hands, this relic of a love I thought was real, and I finally began to cry. On the last day, I walked through the empty rooms one final time. I stood in the doorway of Chloe's childhood bedroom with its faded floral wallpaper. I stood in the living room where David and I had danced to our favorite song. I stood in the kitchen where I had held my daughter in my arms and promised to always keep her safe. I closed the door behind me, the click of the lock echoing the sound of my life breaking in two. I hadn't just lost a house. I had lost the very meaning of the word home. I had lost my daughter. I didn't have a destination. For a 68-year-old woman with one suitcase and a half tank of gas. The world is a map with no names, so I drove past familiar parks where I had pushed Chloe on the swings, past the grocery store where I knew the cashiers by name, past the library where I had first discovered the magic of stories. Every landmark was a ghost. Every street corner held a memory that now felt like a lie. I was an exile in my own hometown. The sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, their familiar glow making me feel even more like an outsider looking in. I was running out of road. I was running out of time. There was only one call I could make, one person left in the world who wouldn't be a stranger. Swallowing the hard, bitter lump of my own pride, a pride that felt like the only thing I had left, I pulled over to the side of the road and dialed Margaret's number. Her voice was as sharp and clear as always. "Eleanor, it's after 9. What's wrong?" She didn't ask if something was wrong. She knew. "Margaret," I began, and my voice cracked, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Can I come over?" She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "The spare bedroom is ready. The door's unlocked. Drive safe." And she hung up. Arriving on her doorstep was the hardest walk of my life. The single suitcase felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, each ounce a measure of my failure. When I stepped inside, Margaret was standing there in her bathrobe, a mug of tea in her hands. She didn't hug me. She wasn't a hugger. She just looked at my face, then at the suitcase, and her own face, usually so full of wry humor, softened into something that looked dangerously close to sorrow. "Put your things in the guest room," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Then come have some tea. The world looks better after a cup of tea." But it didn't. The next few days, the world didn't look like anything at all. It was just a gray, muffled blur. Margaret's spare bedroom became my entire universe. It was a nice room, painted a calm shade of blue, with a window that looked out onto her immaculate garden. But to me, it was a prison cell. I would sit on the edge of the bed for hours, just staring at the floral pattern on the wallpaper until it swam before my eyes. My suitcase sat in the corner, unopened. To open it would be to admit that its meager contents were all I had left. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just existed, a hollowed-out shell of a woman. The past was a chamber of horrors I couldn't bear to enter, and the future was a sheer blank cliff I couldn't possibly scale. So I stayed in the terrible, numb present. My mind would torment me with memories, not of the betrayal, but of the love. I saw Chloe as a toddler, her chubby arms wrapped around my neck. I heard her 6-year-old voice reading a book aloud to me, stumbling over the big words. I felt the phantom weight of her as a teenager, her head on my lap as we watched an old movie. This was the true torture, grieving a child who was still alive, grieving a love that had been a lie. I felt a shame so profound, so suffocating, that it was a physical pain. How could I have been so stupid, so blind? I had not just been robbed. I had been a willing participant in my own destruction. I had held the door open for the thief and offered her a cup of tea. On the 4th day, Margaret came in without knocking. She yanked open the curtains, flooding the dim room with painfully bright sunlight. I flinched, shielding my eyes. That's enough, Eleanor, she said, her voice sharp, leaving no room for argument. I've let you hide in the dark for 3 days. You've earned that. But you don't get to dissolve. You don't get to just end. The world took a bite out of you, a vicious one, but you are not going to let it swallow you whole. Not on my watch. She sat on the chair opposite the bed, her posture erect, her gaze unflinching. Talk to me, she commanded. Tell me everything. And I did. The story came pouring out of me in a torrent of broken sobs and ragged whispers. The red envelope, the phone call, the bank statements, and finally the confrontation. I told her Chloe's words, the ones that were seared into my brain. I just took my inheritance a little early. When I was finished, a great, shuddering silence filled the room. I sat there, empty and exhausted, waiting for the judgment, waiting for the "I told you so" that I so richly deserved. But it never came. Margaret just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on my face. She let the silence stretch, letting the weight of my story settle around us. Finally, she leaned forward. You feel like a fool, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I could only nod, a fresh wave of tears blurring my vision. I was so stupid, Margaret, I whispered. I gave her everything. I trusted her completely. I loved her so much. And that's the whole point, isn't it? She said, her voice suddenly soft. She reached out and put her hand on my shoulder. Her touch was firm, grounding. You think you made a mistake because you loved her. You think your love was the weakness she exploited. She paused, making sure I was listening. Really listening. Eleanor, look at me. I lifted my head, my tear-filled eyes meeting her clear, steady gaze. Love is a gift, she said. Each word deliberate and weighted. You give it freely. It's meant to be unconditional. There was nothing wrong with the love you gave your daughter. She took a breath. But trust is different. Trust is an asset. It is a valuable, precious thing. And you don't give it away freely. You don't hand it over unconditionally. You protect it. You guard it fiercely. Her words hung in the air between us. Love is a gift. Trust is an asset. It was like a key turning in a lock deep inside me. A lock I didn't even know was there. In that quiet moment, in that sunlit room, I finally understood. The fog of my grief and shame began to part, and for the first time I saw the brutal, simple clarity of my failure. My mistake wasn't that I had loved Chloe. My mistake wasn't that I had wanted to help her, to make her life easier. My mistake was that in my grief for David, in my desperate need to be cared for, I had abdicated my own life. I had handed over the responsibility for my own well-being, not just my finances, but myself. I had made my daughter my parent, my caretaker, my guardian. I had given away my power, not because I was loving, but because I was afraid. Afraid of the silence, afraid of the paperwork, afraid of being alone. I had wanted to believe so desperately that my daughter was my savior, that I had willingly ignored the woman she had actually become. The little comments about money, the designer handbag that seemed too expensive, the subtle shift in her eyes when I'd ask about the accounts. I had built a fantasy, and I had punished anyone, including myself, who dared to question it. The lesson was a physical thing. It landed in my gut with the force of a blow, knocking the wind out of me, but also, strangely, filling me with something solid. It was the solid ground of truth. You must be the guardian of your own life. It wasn't Chloe's job to protect me. It was mine, and I had failed. I looked at Margaret, and for the first time in days, the tears had stopped. The pain was still there, a vast black ocean inside me. But the shame, the feeling of being a stupid, helpless victim, was beginning to recede. It was being replaced by a grim, cold, and utterly unfamiliar feeling. The grief was still an impossible weight, but for the first time I could see the shore. I understood the lesson, and I understood its devastating cost. Now I had to decide if I had the strength to live with it. Deciding you have the strength and actually finding it are two very different things. The first is a moment of clarity in a sunlit room. The second is a long, hard, ugly job you have to show up for every single day, especially on the days you don't want to. My moment of clarity with Margaret gave me a direction, a pinprick of light in the overwhelming darkness. But the path to that light was through a swamp of paperwork, humiliation, and grief. The day after our talk, Margaret came home from work and handed me a slip of paper with a name and a number on it. "His name is Mr. Chen," she said. "He works for the Legal Aid Society. His office is downtown. Your appointment is tomorrow at 10. She didn't ask if I wanted to go. She knew that what I wanted was irrelevant. It was about what I had to do. Walking into that office felt like a new kind of defeat. It was a place for people with problems, for people whose lives had come apart at the seams. And that was me. The waiting room was filled with tired faces and the quiet, anxious energy of people on the brink. I sat there, clutching my purse, feeling profoundly out of place and exactly where I belonged, all at once. Mr. Chen was not what I expected. He was a small, quiet man, with kind eyes and hands that were perpetually folded on his desk, as if to contain a deep and patient energy. He didn't offer grand pronouncements or false promises. He just listened. For 2 hours, he just listened as I recounted the whole sordid story for the second time. But this time it wasn't a confession, it was a testimony. When I was done, he nodded slowly. "This is a terrible thing, Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice soft but clear. "It is a deep betrayal. But it is not, I am sorry to say, an uncommon one." Those words, as sad as they were a strange comfort. I wasn't the only foolish mother in the world. I was part of a silent, heartbroken club I had never known existed. Mr. Chen laid out the path forward, and it was a thorny one. It involved filing a police report. It involved officially declaring the fraud to the banks, the credit card companies, the mortgage lender. It involved naming my daughter, Chloe Gable, as the person responsible. That was the hardest part. Saying the words out loud to a police officer, a tired but decent man whose face was a mask of practiced neutrality, felt like the true and final act of severance. It was one thing to know it in my heart. It was another to make it a legal fact, a permanent record of her crime and my loss. When I signed my name at the bottom of that report, I wasn't just signing a document. I was signing the death certificate of the relationship I had cherished for 40 years. There was no rage in that moment, only a deep, hollow ache. It was a necessary amputation to save what was left of my own life. The weeks that followed were a blur of bureaucratic drudgery. With Mr. Chen's steady guidance, I navigated a labyrinth of forms and phone calls. We managed to secure my Social Security pension, untangling it from the frozen, debt-ridden accounts Chloe had created. The first check that arrived, made out to me and sent to Margaret's address, was for a pitifully small amount. But when I held it in my hands, it felt like a fortune. It was the first money that was truly mine, under my control in years. It was the first building block of a new life. Finding a place to live was the next brutal lesson in my new reality. My old life, the one with the paid-off mortgage and the comfortable savings, was a distant memory. My new life was one dictated by the stark mathematics of a fixed income. I looked at dozens of dingy basement suites that smelled of damp third-floor walk-ups that made my knees ache just looking at them. It was a discouraging, humbling process. And then I found it. A one-bedroom apartment in a government-subsidized building for seniors on the other side of town. It wasn't in a fashionable neighborhood. The building itself was a plain brick rectangle, utterly devoid of the character and charm of my old house. My apartment was on the 4th floor. It was small, the entire space could have fit inside my old living room. The paint was a generic, sterile beige. The view from the window was of the parking lot and the wall of the building next door. But it was clean, it was safe, and it was mine. The day I moved in, Margaret helped me. We didn't have much to move. My single suitcase and a few boxes of essentials. Margaret had helped me buy from a second-hand store a bed, a small table, 2 chairs, a few pots and pans. As she left, she gave my shoulder a squeeze. "You'll be all right here, Eleanor," she said, and I knew she was right. Today, my life is unrecognizable from what it was 3 years ago. It is a much, much smaller life. But the strange and wonderful truth is that I feel bigger, more solid. The fear is gone, the blind, hopeful, and ultimately weak trust in others to take care of me. It's been replaced by a quiet, steady confidence in myself. My days have a rhythm that I dictate. I wake up when I want to. I make my own coffee. I sit at my small table with a simple black ledger book and I do my budget. Every single morning, I account for every dollar. Pension in, rent out. Groceries, utilities. I manage it down to the last penny. There is a deep and profound satisfaction in this simple act. It is a daily declaration of my own competence, a daily rebuttal to the helpless woman I had allowed myself to become. I learned to cook again, for one. I find joy in simple things. The perfect tomato from the farmer's market, the smell of a loaf of bread baking in my tiny oven. I volunteer at the local library twice a week, surrounded by the quiet company of books that have always been my friends. I know my neighbors. There's a Mr. Henderson across the hall who plays chess and a Mrs. Sharma downstairs who brings me samosas sometimes. We are a community of survivors, all of us with stories, all of us living these small, quiet lives with a dignity that has nothing to do with the size of our bank accounts. I never heard from Chloe again, after that last day in her apartment. The legal system did what it does. There were consequences for her. Mr. Chen kept me informed, but I found I didn't want to know the details. My healing had nothing to do with her punishment. I think of her, of course. Not the cold-eyed stranger in the designer blouse, but the little girl with the scraped knee, crying for her mother. I grieve for that little girl. I feel a deep and abiding sorrow for the woman she became. But it is the detached sorrow one feels for a tragedy in a newspaper. It no longer has the power to destroy me. Success for me used to be the feeling of a paid-off mortgage, the knowledge of a healthy savings account, the pride of a successful daughter. That was the cathedral I had built. Now, success is a much quieter, humbler thing. It's the trust I have in my own two hands to provide for myself. It's the peace I feel in the silence of my own company. Most of all, success is the feeling I get every single night. I walk through my small beige apartment, I check that the stove is off, I turn out the light, and then I walk to my front door. I turn the deadbolt, and I hear that solid, satisfying thunk as the bolt slides into place. It is the most beautiful sound in the world. It is the sound of safety. It is the sound of a border I control. And as I stand there in the darkness, I know, with an absolute certainty, that I am the only one with the key. I had lost a fortune, a house, and a daughter. But here in the quiet of this small room that was entirely my own, I had finally found the one thing that had been missing all along. And that feeling, that absolute certainty that I am the only one with the key, that is why I am telling you this story today. It's not for sympathy. It's not to put my pain on display. It's for the person listening to my voice right now, who is standing in the before part of their own story. The person who is basking in the warmth of a love so complete, they can't imagine it ever causing them harm. The person who believes, as I did, that a loving family is one without walls, without boundaries, without secrets. I am here to beg you to learn from my pain so that you never have to experience it for yourself. Love your children, love your family with every single fiber of your being. Pour your heart into them, support them, be their softest place to land. That is a gift. It is the most beautiful, meaningful part of a life. Do not ever let a story like mine make you cynical about love. My love for Chloe was not my mistake. My mistake was forgetting to love myself. My mistake was believing that my role as a mother required my own erasure. So please, I implore you, protect your independence, as if it is the most precious thing you own, because it is. It is the bedrock of your own safety and your own dignity. Help your loved ones, but do not let your help become their entitlement. It is a fine line, but it is a line you must draw. Impermanent. Keep your name on your accounts. Open your own mail. Ask questions, not because you are suspicious, but because you are an active participant in your own life. You are the CEO of your own existence, and you must never, ever cede that position to anyone else, no matter how much you love them. If they are trustworthy, they will understand and respect your engagement. If they push back, if they make you feel guilty for wanting to be involved in your own affairs, I beg you, listen to that. That is a warning. Never, ever believe that being careful is a sign of distrust. It is a sign of self-respect. A healthy love, a true and honest love, does not require you to make yourself small or helpless. It does not demand that you hand over the keys. It asks that you stand beside them, strong and whole, with your own set of keys in your own pocket. Grief, loneliness, these things make us vulnerable. They make us crave a savior. I wanted Chloe to be mine, to fill the vast, competent space my David had left behind. But it is not our children's job to save us. It is our job to save ourselves. The reason I share all this with you, the deepest reason of all, is because I know my story is not unique. The details are different, but the heartbreak is the same, and I believe in the power of shared wisdom to build a fortress that no thief can breach. So I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a difficult financial boundary with a loved one? What did you learn from it? Let's empower each other in the comments below. Let's build a community of wisdom right here. Thank you so much for listening. Be kind to yourselves and be wise. I'll see you in the next story.